Welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. It's the last week of our mini-season where we invite listeners to come and tell us about their favourite episodes and what they can take away into their business and personal lives. This week we have an old friend of mine, Nina Killick, the lady responsible for one of the few times in my life where I ran voluntarily. And we're also joined by Lieutenant Colonel Anne O'Flynn, the commanding officer of the British Army's 1st Military Working Dog Regiment. And she contacted me through the amazing Sandhurst Sisterhood Network to tell me how much she enjoyed listening to the podcast. It's quite a sporty episode. We're talking about rugby, running, triathlons, CrossFit, sailing, paddleboarding and bog snorkeling. But we also talk about values, making a stand, creativity, change management and being included. So come and have a listen to this last episode of Guests with Gifts. Hello and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper for this final mini with Guests with Gifts. This is the break that Bobby and I are having to allow some of our listeners to have a say and let us know really how we're doing, what they like about the podcast, and maybe give us some ideas for the next season. So this week we have the lovely Nina Killick, who is a longtime friend of mine, and Anne O'Flynn, who's an avid listener, I understand, and contacted me through the amazing Sandhurst Sisterhood Facebook page. So let's get going. And Anne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, Bridge, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to join you on this little mini episode. What a treat. So I am an extrovert. I'm a people-loving trailblazer. I enjoy being with crowds of people. I'm an innovator. I'm someone who loves to challenge the norm and to prove people wrong. I am somebody who takes the sentence, "you can't do that," as a direct challenge to push back and challenge stereotypes. I'm a rule breaker. I'm a pioneer and I'm a truth sayer. I'm also a firm family member, a sports billy, and somebody who loves to be with people and animals and to be outside.
Wow, that's a massive combination. Thanks very much, Anne. And I'm looking forward to maybe delving a little bit deeper into some of those things as we talk about the podcast. So, Nina, how about you?
Yes, hi, morning. Good morning. Well, that's a really tough act to follow, like I've got to say. So how do I describe myself? Well, first of all, I'm a transplant to these two shores via two other continents. Something I fell into purely by chance, which has been quite good for me, is that I'm a coach. I'm a teacher and a mentor in various disciplines, which I find quite brilliant. Unlike Anne, I'm not much of a people person. I don't like crowds. However, I do like the outdoors and I do like to explore. And because of the curiosity, I have so many interests that sometimes I wonder if I'll ever, satisfy all those sort of itches that I've got to get out there and investigate.
Thanks, Nina. Well, I would say I've experienced Nina's coaching because she is, amongst other things, a running coach, and she tried very, very hard to help me become a runner. And while she's brilliant as a coach, it just didn't have a very good person to work with. However, we have spent some time doing lots of fitness stuff, actually, that's really unusual for me through CrossFit and the bog snorkeling.
Yeah.
And Nina, I have to say, was the runner-up in the bog snorkeling triathlon several years ago. So yeah, we've had some fun, and through sailing as well. So we've had some fun experiences. So let's move on to what got you listening. And you are allowed to say, "because I told you to," if that's the truth. So Nina, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I remember seeing a message from Bridge about a podcast that she was launching. And the name just tickled me because I remember years ago when I lived at Blandford camps and my late husband was retired army. And I just loved the name. We were at Blandford at the time that the women were allowed to then go front line. And so I remember coming through the front gate one time, the first time, with a woman in her lumpy jumper at the gate. And it was just a comment that Bob had made, and it's always kind of stuck with me. And I thought, well, if anyone's going to choose a name like this, it's going to be Bridge. So I figured it's got to be good. And I've been listening ever since. I use it as sort of my morning commute and just really enjoy it. Really, really enjoy it.
Thanks, Nina. Is there anything that, I guess, makes you want to keep listening, other than obviously that I'm in it?
Well, there is that, but what I absolutely love is the complete and utter irreverence to all the rules of political correctness and stuff that drives me absolutely bonkers. And the fact that, yeah, if you just feel like saying it fucked me off, well, that's exactly how you put it. And, it's nice to see that rather than some of the sort of sanitized versions you get on podcasts these days. I find the content inspiring. There's a lot going on there and a lot in my background that I've been able to kind of make use of one way or another.
Thanks, Nina. We'll get onto that in a little moment. Anne, how about you? Because I definitely didn't tell you as a friend to listen.
No, that's right. I found the podcast actually through a link in an article, and I can't remember exactly which article it was, but as in my current role, I'm actually still serving. I'm not a veteran. I am a trained veterinary surgeon, so anybody reading my profiles might see vet and think Army veteran. But in fact, I'm an Army veterinary officer. So in my current role, I've just taken over the commanding officer in the 1st Military Working Dog Regiment in the British Army. So wow. I've been preparing for this role for, well, you could say my entire life, but more recently in the last couple of years, and have been doing dedicated reading and research and personal development around leadership. So for me, the name intrigued me, and having been in it for over 20 years in the military, I've heard unfortunately, quite a lot of the bad names which women get called and the slurs and the judgment. So I liked as you said, Nina, the irreverence of the title. And so I went looking, I found the podcast, and I think I listened to the first 6 episodes in the space of about five days.
Wow.
And yes, it just struck a chord. I was just amused, entertained, intrigued, and I began to really appreciate the insights that you'd shared. And also, I know both of you have a military background, which was, I think, during the time when I first joined. So I was very easily able to relate to the comments and the references which you gave and shared.
Cool. Thanks for that. And yes, I had no idea that you were a vet. That's really cool. And the commander of the dog regiment. Yeah. Oh. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe get to talk about that again a little bit more, since we're all animal lovers. So we've talked about what got you listening. We've talked about a little bit about what keeps you listening. So let's have a little chat about what your favorite episode is. And obviously, it's, I guess, for some people, it may be like having to choose your favorite child. So you can change your mind afterwards, but I'm going to put you on the spot for maybe 1 or 2 just for this chat. And how about you?
Well, for me, there are a number of episodes that really resonated, and I've been back to listen to again, and I've actually shared specific episodes with friends. But the one that really struck home was about curiosity. And I know you've done a couple on curiosity throughout the series, and I confess I haven't had time to listen to every single episode yet. But for me, it was that aspect about curiosity, and also the session you did about play, where I really enjoyed your insights and references, particularly about the phrase, when empathy starts with curiosity. That was a phrase which really hit me hard. And as I began to sort of start this current role where I was entering into a senior leadership role, I was really keen to keep that in my mind. One of the kind of mantras I took with me as a reminder to try and be always curious first, rather than necessarily jump into conclusions. And so I have that as one of my reminders for myself. I also really enjoyed the session you did with your guest, with Alison Riley, one of your previous Sandhurst colleagues, I believe. And for somebody who's a woman of faith, my own faith is really important to me, and actually I believe has led me to be in the Army as a veterinary officer. So it was really intriguing to hear Alison's reflections on her journey and how she had transitioned through so many different career options before finding the calling and vocation she is now. And I also loved the camaraderie between the three of you in that episode, particularly where it was like listening in on a kind of best friends chat, or almost like a family kind of catch up over a meal. It felt really welcoming and warm, and I felt as somebody listening in, I felt as if I was part of that conversation as an included member, rather than feeling like an outsider kind of earwigging in the corner. So so for me, those have been 2 key areas. And the other ones I've always loved about being authentic. Being unashamedly authentic is one of my own personal mantras which I try and abide by. So I did appreciate the challenges and I guess the kind of affirmation that actually being the authentic you in leadership roles or in life generally is the most convincing and thing you should be, rather than trying to be somebody else and what you think society or your colleagues or your family and friends want you to be. Actually being you is the most important thing. So there's actually three things. I'm really sorry, but
hey, I'm not going to judge. Yeah, it's really interesting that so many people have talked about Alison's episode as one of the ones that they really loved, and I have to say it probably is my favorite out of all of them. And I just remember when I was editing it, so listening to it again, because I think sometimes while obviously active listening and you are actively listening to engage during the conversation, you often don't get to listen back to chats you have with your mates. And so it was really interesting to listen. Sometimes I do it when I'm listening to Bobby talking as well, going, God, they're really, really wise women. And wow, that's, some of the things like, oh my goodness. But I am desperate to get Alison onto Thought for a Day on Radio 4. So if anyone out there is listening who has any connections to, and actually I'm volunteering Alison with that asking her, but if anyone has connections to Thought for the Day on Radio 4, do get in touch, because I think she would be amazing.
Agreed.
Right then. Nina.
Oh gosh, this was a bit tough because I did go back through quite a few of the episodes to kind of refresh my memory about them, but there's two serious and two not so serious favorites, and then a fifth one which I kind of threw in after I wrote my list out. But the constantly curious one was being comfortable with curiosity, because I will try anything. I will look for that sort of needle in a haystack, and it's probably why I can do a lot of different things, but not necessarily be a master of any, but at least I've, dabbled, I've tried. And I think that's really important. It's particularly this day and age with so much social media and stuff. People just don't get out and they break down that boundary of, your device screen and get out there and really learn and be curious about the world around them. The other one was about being a wall breaker. Given the work I've done over the last few years, which has been pretty much in a male-dominated, slightly misogynistic environment, it was really good to know that, yes, I'm not alone, and B, that there are possibilities and there are strategies. And I have to say that, I'm going to pat myself on the back probably, but I've been quite successful with a lot of the people I work with, and they do defer to me when they have issues, I guess probably because I'm not in a threatening position or anything like that, but I have made myself a bit more approachable having used some of your strategies. School Your Face cracked me up because I am so much, it's like all over the place. So that really resonated with me. And then I think the final one was, oh gosh, it was on being blame free. And I was just listening to this and I was pottering around the house and I just happened to reach over to the kitchen counter just as Bobby was telling a story about Doritos. And I just happened to be stuffing Doritos into my mouth at the same time, which made me giggle. So I kind of put that one on there. But just going back to what Anne and what Bridget said about Alison Riley's episode, I found that really refreshing because I have no religion. And she put forward a point of view that was not overbearing, was really empathetic. And the fact that she tends to work more with the younger crowd these days and kind of help them find direction was probably the bit that sort of ticked all the boxes for me on that one.
Yeah, I think that Alison may have to get another episode of her own on.
Yeah.
If I can't get her on Radio 4. Anyway, thank you so much for that. It's really lovely to hear. I think that sometimes, when Bobby and I are planning the topics or thinking about how we're going to deal with issues and just getting on and recording, sometimes we do wonder whether we're sort of shouting into the void. So this set of minis has been really, really lovely for all of us to understand that people are listening and that we are making a difference in our tiny podcast little way.
Yeah, I think for me also the thing which really comes through the recordings is the affection with which you hold each other and also the affection with which you hold and interact with your, particularly the Sandhurst colleagues, and again with Alison and yet with other, I think Wendy Fawkes' episode as well, and I know Wendy a little, but it was lovely to kind of hear her perspective, knowing her, how enthusiastic and enigmatic she is. Bonkers, yes. But also, and yeah, for me, that was that affectionate part which really kind of pours through the microphone in a way which makes you feel welcome, rather than that slightly kind of like, oh, who are these two people, what they're talking about? It's a case of, oh, it's a conversation I wish I'd been invited to. So for me, that's the conversation aspect I think you put across really well from my perspective as a new listener who didn't know either of you beforehand. And as I listen more, I think I hear and can make more and more connections. For example, I believe Bobby sings in Military Wires choir. I've sung in various choirs throughout my military career. So it's amazing we haven't actually crossed over, she and I, in various choirs. We may have done for all I know, but that's what I've also really enjoyed about it.
Cool. Well, if you're in Camberley, then you'll keep an eye out for her, because she does quite a lot of walking on. What's that horrible place called? That's it. I'm sure it's lovely. It just gives me flashbacks. I drove past it the other day. I was pointing it to my husband and going, "Oh my God, that place." It's
much better with a dog on the end of a lead or around you.
I can imagine fewer logs and fewer stretchers, I think, but,
and fewer instructions. That always helps.
Yes, shouting people.
Choose your own path.
Yep.
Okay, so I know that we've covered a lot of topics, and sometimes we do repeat some topics where we feel that, sometimes we sort of get through a 45, 50-minute session and think we still haven't even scratched the surface on this topic, and we really enjoy it. We want to revisit it, particularly curiosity and play. I suspect we'll be revisiting those again. But are there any topics that either of you have sat there and gone, oh God, I really wish they'd cover this topic. It'd be really cool if they did this. Or I would love to hear what they have to think about this topic. Because we're planning for season 4, I think now, and beyond. So Nina, have you got anything that you would like to help us cover?
Yeah, I really struggled with this one, mostly because I've been out of the corporate world for quite a while now, and a lot of my work is just piecemeal, and I just sort of get parachuted in to do a little job and then go away. But what I've found working with a lot of these small organizations in projects is no one likes change. There's just too much uncertainty around it. People need to understand how change works, how change can benefit, but the cornerstone of that really is understanding how to get people to change in order to make the change work. I get all the time, it's like, well, we're going to change this and we're going to do it today. Oh, but we've been doing that for forever, right? And it's not quite the first world environment I work in, but, for third world countries to actually go forward, they need to embrace change. And therefore, they need people who understand how change works and how to get people to change and how to appreciate it and how to maintain it. I think that's a huge topic, completely huge, but it's probably the one that hit me the heart and it mostly for me because of the work that I've been doing. So
awesome. Love it. And change is difficult for everybody.
I know.
And as you said, it's the getting people on board for the change before the change.
Exactly.
The massive thing. And I have to say, some of the work that I do in humanitarian mine action and sort of behaviour change comes into that, getting people to, and even when it's sort of really obvious that it's some behaviour is going to save their lives, still trying to get people to change their behavior, because there's so many other things like economic drivers and cultural drivers
and social. Absolutely.
So I agree, it's an enormous topic, but I'm fascinated by this idea of behavior change and change management. So brilliant. Love that idea as a topic. Anne?
Now, I had a good think about this because I've always been, I guess, a passive podcast listener in that I'm quite happy to hear what everyone else kind of pours out the microphone to me. And so I felt like I've been set a little bit of homework to really think about and rack my brain, which is fine. Although I am on my first week of annual leave for quite some time. So I actually had some good time paddleboarding and walking the dog yesterday to consider this. And the thing that came to my mind was forceful, respectful, and successful challenge. So in the military environment, we have a very clear hierarchical structure, and we are imbibed with the challenge of mission command and take things forward, but also there is this underlying values and standards which we have to maintain and to form and live by. But actually, when there are times when things are difficult or against your values, or you believe not to be right, how do you successfully and respectfully, yet assertively enough to make it successful, make that challenge? So in the corporate world, I can appreciate it's different, where the hierarchical structure isn't quite so rigid and there aren't many procedures, protocols, and formalized policy documents, particularly around orders and giving direction. But for me, that's the thing I think in practical terms, people often struggle with. How do and whether it's something as simple as people using language you don't appreciate or making assumptions that you'd like to challenge. If you're the junior person in that professional relationship, or if you're a peer, or if you're somebody completely outside of that company and you just overheard them talking on the train or in the ladies' toilet, how do you interject, make a point that doesn't leave you feeling unhappy? Because I'm somebody my values are really important to me, and I get really angry when those values are trampled on, and actually hearing others being treated without respect is something which makes me really riled. And sometimes I've learned to recognize that actually that's a prompt me to do something, and therefore how do I manage that? How do you approach strangers is different to how you approach a professional colleague, but for me that's one area I think could be quite interesting to look at. Another one I looked at, my own background is with also an elite sport. And for me, it was rugby, but also play cricket to representative level. And so the correlation between leadership and sporting success, I'm always intrigued by. And I make no bones about it. I joined the army to keep playing rugby at elite level. And I then found that it actually was the best place for me to be. And actually, I should have joined the army many years ago, but that's a different story. But so for me, that correlation between how sports people work and in teams and how that team carries across into professional life, I think is really cool. So my example is in my women I know, my rugby teams are successful at rugby players. They're also very successful in their professional life because I believe the qualities and attributes they develop are significantly transferable in a way that maybe is not recognized more so now, but even particularly more for women. I think it's a real advocate for them. And then also looking again about a military context, but very relevant to the commercial aspects, leading mixed teams. So the social dynamics of leading people in pressurized situations really varies if you have all women and all men, or if you have one woman and everybody else being male, or if you have half and half. The social dynamics of managing those and motivating and leading those is a personal challenge for me right now. But actually, in terms of crisis situations, you need to have that relationship nailed. So those are three areas I think I'd love to think more about and hear your thoughts on. And I'd be really intrigued to see what guests, you might bring into those kind of conversations.
Wow. Thank you. Obviously done your homework really well.
That's your season already planned out.
I love that. I've been looking at particularly where I've been doing work on allyship, particularly for men as gender allies. And it's a real issue of the calling out, calling in dilemma, as you said, at different sort of levels of the hierarchy, whether you're doing that with a peer, whether you're doing that as a subordinate, whether you're doing that as a leader, or whether you're doing that as a leader to other leaders. And all of that dynamic is really, really complicated. But as you said, really values driven, I think, because I think there's quite a lot of work being done at the moment on bystander behavior. And you find that the people who will step up in bystander situations are people who are very clear about their values, I think, because they have to have something to hold on to because it's scary. Yeah, super. That's a lovely topic. Leadership and sport, probably not so much for me, but I know Bobby was a heptathlete, I think, when she was at Sandhurst, and she, big sporty creature that she is. So that's really interesting because, there's a whole thing about sport people generally in teams, but also if they're not in teams, there's that sort of determination, grit, dedication to focus, all of those sort of things, vision, that I think is really, I hadn't thought about it, but I completely, when you say it, it's like, oh, actually, I can completely
see the aspects of discipline and goal setting and tenacity and true resilience, I think. When I first went through basic training as a professionally qualified officer, I went through a little bit of introductory training before I was even allowed to go to Sandhurst, along with other doctors, nurses, physios and dentists. And my platoon commander, who was a gnarly Welsh ex-ranker, late entry captain in the RAMC, literally pulled me in for an interview and said, "Have you been in the army before?" "I swear you've been in before." I said, "Literally, no." He said, "Have you been in UOTC?" I said, "No." "You done cadets? Did you do what, CCF?" I said, "I've never done anything, not even brownies." He said, "Well, how do you get it? You get this." I said, "I played rugby all my life." I said, "That's what's taught me my values in life." And he said, "Well, that's good because I'm a Welshman and let's talk about the Six Nations." And literally he pushed aside his pile of papers.
Stop the army, let's talk about rugby.
Yeah, rugby,
and that was it. So
brilliant.
He remains a great mentor and support, actually. He was a true friend and actually somebody I am proud to sort of still be in touch with now. But yeah, that was a formative discussion in my army time.
Yeah, love those relationships are, very, very precious. And the mixed team thing. So again, I guess it's usually been me as the only female, so I haven't really thought about it so much. But yeah, I think I'd love to have a little chat with Bobby about that, or see if we can find someone who might be able to talk about that. So yeah, super. And that's full, really useful and interesting topics. So keep an eye out. They might come up in season 5 because season 4 is rapidly approaching. And as we're talking about things that are rapidly approaching, we're coming up to the end of this episode. But before we close it all down and move on with the rest of our day, and for me, looks like quite a sunny day, unusually for Ireland, have you got 3 people that you think would enjoy the podcast and that you would like to pay it forward by sharing with them? Nina?
Yes, absolutely. My 2 sort of best friends over here at the moment, Joe and Elaine. I mentioned to them that I was going to be doing this, and they were going, "Oh, so what's the podcast all about?" And I told them, and they're like, "Oh, we'd really like to get into that." Joe works for a logistics, shipping and food manufacturing company locally. So she has a number of roles, and I think it would be really good for her to be able to get in there and have a little bit more of insight as to how things do work, and that she's not alone in the stuff that she comes home and moans about. And Elaine, she used to be in travel and corporate travel and things like that, and I think she would benefit from a few little bits and pieces. But the final one is a young lady that I met last winter who moved into her first serious HR role in a hotel group. Her name's Janella, and she's quite a rapid learner. And I think her first year was a bit of a baptism by fire. And I think some of the stuff that you talk about in terms of, being the wall breaker, the looking after yourself, the curiosity aspects, I think she would not only benefit, but I think she'd quite enjoy the banter that goes on as well. I'm going to, when I see her in a couple of weeks, I will definitely put this her way and suggest that she might have a bit of a gander through all your episodes.
Cool, thank you. And Bobby's most recent background is in HR and hospitality.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
Well, I would like to share this firstly with a great woman I met recently called Sarah Patterson. She is somebody I met through Facebook again, through the Veterinary Professional Network. And she expressed an interest with a member of her family thinking about joining the army. And when we got talking, we found out we had lots of cross interests. And particularly she looks at working with veterinary professionals who are returning to practice. And majority of students entering veterinary training now are female, have been for a long time. And that brings a different dynamic to a profession across the board, which is traditionally, I think, sort of 30, 40, 50 years ago, the sort of James Herriot ideal. Yeah. And that kind of idyllic painted picture of a driving around the Yorkshire countryside, which is appealing. But nowadays, profession's in a very different place and faces a lot of real social and financial challenges, as well as a big struggle currently about legislation and pricing being very challenging for many people. But Sarah works with veterinary surgeons who are looking to restore their confidence and return to practice, often after taking a break either through family reasons, education, or stress levels. And there have been, unfortunately, a significant number of mental health challenges, and many veterinary surgeons are really struggling to remain in practice. So Sarah's a great bit of work working with them and also restoring confidence and building individualized skills. And so she's somebody I've met recently who I'd like to share this podcast with. Again, I mentioned the name to her briefly and she kind of grinned instantly at saying, I know what that means. An Army colleague, fantastic Alison Cripps, who is, after a fantastic career as an Army nurse of over 30 years, where she has moved from being a private soldier right through to now being a colonel, she is due to leave in the near future after a fantastic service. And she is a mezzo-soprano. So she sings professionally sacred and opera music. And she's just a phenomenal example of somebody who has changed her life over investing in public service and is now about to leave after a fantastic career and actually is looking to a completely different area, something which I'm musical and I love music, but that kind of professional singing is just amazing. So she's somebody who I think will appreciate it. And again, having been a woman who's grown up through the Army over 30 years, she has seen and heard, unfortunately, all that banter, which you and I will know, Bridge. She and I only recently worked together in a couple of jobs ago, but she is a serenely professional and the most compassionate and insightful, empathetic woman I think I've met for a very long time. So I'm hoping her network will be a very different network to kind of cross the boundaries, but also just to really help her. And the final, well, actually, I'm going to cheat slightly and have a group of people to share it with. So I did a fantastic course last year with the Resilient Women Leaders, which is led by, I believe, a Camberley choir colleague of Bobby's, a lady called Sky Dean, who's an ex-military physio, and she was a consultant and led to a fantastic course of female leaders looking to develop more resilience and using a fantastic RLE framework about finding the words to articulate who you are is not just about what you do, and which is exactly the introduction you asked to give today. So I've cheated. I've already shared this podcast with them and said, I found this and it was just brilliant. And I think it will resonate with lots of you. And I've had lots of comments back from the group saying, oh, this is great. Made me giggle on my drive to work, whatever. So those are my sort of three people, but I've cheated slightly. Hope you don't mind.
Not at all. The more the merrier. I really, really appreciate it. And we're at the end of the recording. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time and putting in all of that thought for the homework that you were given. I really, really appreciate it, and Bobby will too. So I hope you keep listening. I hope that you continue to enjoy it.
Thank you, Bridge.
Thanks for listening. And thank you so much for all the brave listeners who volunteered or were voluntold to appear as guests on this fun break from the norm. If you'd love to tell us about why you listen to More Than a Lumpy Jumper, then do get in touch, as we'll be recording more listener slots in November. Next week, Bobby and I are back together for season 4, and we're talking to the multi-talented Army veteran Fiona Galbraith from Rural Link in Being Able to Pivot. See you then.